Education has an essential role in society since it allows human beings to grow in different fields. It is the way to expand our minds intellectually, emotionally, and morally. Nowadays, it is well known education is a fundamental right. It means everyone, no matter their skin color, their race, nationality, or genre, all have the right to have access to education, an education of quality. However, in our Colombian context, the reality is different. Plenty of the population is lacking the opportunity of being educated. Many others take their classes in beautiful buildings, but the quality of education is not the best. Or, on the contrary, there is a teacher with a pretty good attitude and preparation to teach, but the school facilities and tools are absent. And that's not all. Despite the continuous advances in education and after thousands and thousands of researches about methodologies and pedagogical topics, the governing educational system is not the best. Many of us grew up believing the fallacy that the best student was who got the best grades, but who lost a subject was a fault. Persistently, we were told by teachers and parents that our grades were quite important, and those ones said how good students we were. But little was said that students are humans, and they feel and worry about family issues, that loneliness is a terrible friend in an educational process. Additionally, we didn't know that not everybody has the same abilities and strengths, or that each person has a learning style and it affects the way we perceive the world that finally is reflected in an evaluation paper. Probably, if many of us had known all those little details nowadays, we wouldn't be frustrated people full of insecurities.
¿Cómo te sientes cuando eres evaluado?
Pues depende si estudié para evaluación o no, porque si no estudié para evaluación me voy a sentir asustado porque pues voy a sentir que voy a perder la evaluación. Y en cambio cuando estudio me siento contento porque siento que van a preguntar lo que estudié.
¿Cómo te sientes al momento de ser evaluado?
Angustiado y preocupado porque no sé si me va a ir bien o mal.
There are different types of assessment in education. All assessment methods have different purposes during and after instruction. For example, there is the pre-assessment or diagnostic assessment, in which the aim is to know the student's strengths, weaknesses, skills, and knowledge they possess before taking an instruction. Another is the formative assessment, in which the goal is to monitor student learning to provide feedback. On the other hand, it is the confirmative assessment, which finds out if an implemented instruction is still a success after a year. Also, it is the norm reference assessment, in which the aim is to compare a student's performance against an average norm. Another is the criterion reference assessment, that measures students' performances against a fixed set of determined criteria or learning standards. And finally, the ipsative assessment, that measures the performance of the students against previous performances from that student. So let's see what students know about this.
¿Qué tipos de evaluaciones tienes?
Tengo orales y escritas y cada vez al finalizar el periodo hacen una bimestral, la cual preguntan lo que nuestro conocimiento que tuvimos en cada periodo.
¿Qué tipo de evaluaciones tienes en tu colegio?
Escritas y las profesoras me hablan y yo las tengo que responder, y también por plataformas online.
Taking into account that students have different type of assessment, for them the summative assessment is one of the most important, since it is the one that evaluates the learning in a concise way and they are concerned about obtaining a good result. But at the same time, this causes uncertainty since the students don't know what type of assessment they're going to implement in their process. That's why we want to ask teachers what type of assessment they prefer to implement in their classes.
What is your favorite kind of assessment?
Right. I think I'm all about formative assessment. I mean, it all depends on what categories for assessment you're going to work with. If you work with summative assessment versus formative assessment, then we're talking about whether you focus on the process or just the final product, whether you're talking about qualitative versus quantitative assessment, so you're talking more about assessing like feedback or simply testing. But let's talk about formative versus summative assessment. And I believe formative assessment, ongoing assessment, empowers the student to identify that making mistakes is part of the process and that mistakes are not your problem, but your opportunity to improve, to reflect, to identify. I think that's what assessment should be all about.
It is evident that teachers are clear about the role of teacher in learning process and both agree on the implementation of summative and formative evaluation, since one allows them to identify students' real learning and the other provides them with a reflection of their own learning process. However, listening to the students, it is evident that they only know about summative assessment because they only see assessment as a way to get good grades and pass subjects.
What do you think your students think about the assessment process?
I think there are different opinions and experiences about assessment. Some of them are still a little bit negative in the sense that assessment has to do with giving them a grade, passing or failing simply. So a lot of people fear assessment, and that has to do because there's a misconception around the notion, the concept of assessment. Other students do understand that assessment is the channel for them to improve their process, to empower themselves as students, and then they appreciate being assessed and being given feedback.
It is important to take into account students and their emotions in an evaluation process in order to help them to develop the self-confidence and encourage them to understand the real importance of these evaluations and assessments, not only in their academic lives or matters, but also in their daily lives. Students should be interested in their process so that they are not only concerned about a numerical grade, but also about their learning and the improvement.
¿Consideras que tener evaluaciones en tu proceso de aprendizaje es importante?
Sí, porque puedo pasar el año y puedo reforzar si yo tengo algo mal.
¿Consideras que tener evaluaciones en tu proceso de aprendizaje es importante?
Sí, lo considero muy importante porque de esta manera me puedo dar cuenta en qué momento pues estoy como fallando en ciertos temas, se puede decir, y cuáles son mis debilidades en ese tema y cuáles son mis fortalezas. Entonces pues de esta manera puedo saber como el proceso de aprendizaje que estoy teniendo y pues de esta manera mejorar.
According to the answers of the interviewed students, it is important to highlight that in the way the students grow up in their learning process, they become more aware about the importance of assessment, since they are more autonomous, and in the majority of the cases, college students study by pleasure or because they want to achieve their personal goals, while the youngest students usually are forced to study by their parents or adults in charge. That's why we wonder how the concept of being assessed could change. What you can do for improve like that environment?
Right. I think it was Grant Wiggins, one of the pioneers in the whole revolution of assessment, of formative assessment. And he said that assessment is not something you do to students, but something you do with students. And that little preposition makes a whole world of difference. So what I do is that I involve students in three aspects: in the purpose of assessment, the practice of assessment and the design of assessment. So the purpose is, why are we doing this in the first place? They need to know that we do this so that they improve their process. They learn better, they make the most of their learning experience. The practice of assessment, how do we do it? And we can involve them by doing not just teacher assessment, but peer assessment, self-assessment, and even in the design of assessment, what instruments are better for us to assess your process? A test is not always the best and the only option to assess performance.
In conclusion, the evaluation is very important because it helps teachers and institutions to know what are the real needs of students. Also, the role of the teacher is no longer a means by which gives knowledge and measuring numbers, but is also responsible for providing a self-knowledge and self-reflection for students to constantly improve both academically and personally. In addition, there is still much work to be done to improve the implementation of evaluations and teaching processes, so that they are not seen as something mandatory and tedious, but as something really necessary and in line with the learning process.